Ladies and gentlemen, we are going live roundabout now. There's always that awkward moment, never quite get a red light with Facebook Lives. So we're talking today with Hugh Owen from Accel Club, and we are talking all about what they, as an aggregator, as a buyer of Amazon businesses, are looking for in small businesses, which is really important. This is one thing to think about selling a business. It's another one to know is my business sellable, and more actively, what can you do to make it really attractive? So Hugh, thanks so much for coming on live with us. Great to have you with us.
It's my pleasure to be here, Michael. Thank you.
And for those listening, so if you're listening live or on the replay, do pop in any comments or questions. And we probably won't have time to come to many of them on the show, but I will keep a lookout for the chat here. And if any interesting questions come up that fit in, certainly happy to fit them into the show itself. So it's your opportunity to get sort of live responses from an expert. Other than that, do put them in, and we'll check them on the replay as well. A lot of people watch these things on the replay, but they're joining from Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Welcome. And in a second, we're going to do, as we traditionally do on our podcast, we're going to record a couple of podcasts live within the live. So if I reintroduce everyone in a minute, as I reintroduce Hugh, then I haven't lost my plot. It's just that's how we do it here. So Hugh, ready to rock and roll with this podcast?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Actually, yeah. Born ready is the only acceptable phrase in America, isn't it? I think. Okay, right then, here we go. Ladles and jelly spoons, boys and girls, welcome to the 10K Collective podcast, the place to be for 6, 7, and 8-figure Amazon business owners, particularly a private label seller, and that's a subset of the amazing FBA family of podcast heads, the two logos around my head here. Today, we are talking to Hugh Owen from Accel Pro. Accel Pro is a buyer and operator of Amazon brands, and they use their own unique in-house tech, which I think is an important thing we're going to dive into, to optimize and scale the businesses. They don't just outsource it to other people. And frankly, behind the scenes, a lot of people that I've spoken to, aggregators, use other people, because I speak to those other people as well. So you guys do it in-house. Hugh is the acquisition specialist. So he's the one who negotiates with sellers whose businesses they may consider buying. So the perfect person to talk to about making a business more sellable and more attractive. So Hugh, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here, Michael. Thank you.
And where are you coming to us from in the world, Hugh?
So I'm actually coming from, well, we have our operations team based here in Moscow. So I'm here right now. I'm originally from Virginia in the United States, and I do represent the business frequently in the United States. So if you're at any of the events there, I'd be happy to meet with you if we haven't already. And we have our headquarters based in Amsterdam. We also have an office in China, and we also have team members in the US and throughout Europe. So at this point, we're very much a global company. But yeah, a lot of the data engineering takes place in Eastern Europe, and we are headquartered in Amsterdam. So that's kind of the focal point of the business right now.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think you're sort of, what's the word? Not crowdsourcing, the right word. I guess you're sort of optimizing where you do what operations. So Amsterdam is I think overtaken the city of London now, sadly, thanks to the madness of Brexit, if I may say that. That's now becoming a big financial HQ once again for companies. Like, lest we forget, the Dutch actually invented the the public limited corporation, as far as I understand it, or the company concept. And then of course the East Europeans are these days seen as the place to be for amazing developers, right? India is still very good, but I think that a lot of people I see are in Eastern Europe. So you kind of got the best of all worlds there. I think it's a very international outlook. I like that a lot. So let's talk about this. The first thing then, you're obviously the person that is at the sharp end of looking at people's businesses. What is it that smaller businesses bring to the table? Because obviously it can be very sort of intimidating if you're doing $1 or $2 million a year in revenue. Maybe you got a nice profitable business and a lovely brand, but you look around at the widest landscape that suddenly people are throwing around the word billions a lot in the aggregator space. Mm-hmm. How do we even begin to sort of compete in that sort of world?
Sure. Yeah. So, well, I think there are a couple points that are crucial here, but I think really a good place to start, and one place where I always start my calls with when I'm speaking with sellers, is a bit about the personal vision that they had from the brand earlier on. A lot of the time, they are very sensitive to a certain unique need in the marketplace. And that's why, previous to Accel Club, I was working as a portfolio manager, and I noticed that a lot of these larger companies like Unilever or Procter and Gamble, people were kind of funds were moving out of those companies because they noticed that market share was being captured by these third-party sellers. And I think the reason why that's happened is that sellers are just more sensitive to the demands of different individuals, different buyers, and they're able to express that awareness by launching unique products on Amazon. And I think that's really the key to their success, and I think that'll continue to be the case, far into the future.
Great, I love the answer. And by the way, this really ties in with an obsession I've always got with people who have I work less so these days with startups who are trying to create a private label brand. Almost you must obsess about talking with the consumers. And I think what you just underlined, the fact that you can make money by just mass producing stuff that's roughly right for the consumer. But it's nice to hear that actually we can really leverage that strength, but we have to lean into it, right? And I imagine that if you look at a business that has a very generic type product, that it's not really going to be, in other words, it doesn't really appeal to a particular customer base, that it's not really going to be a very acquirable business. Is that right? The flip side of it?
Yeah, I think so. I think, the more you lean into a more, say, commoditized product, the more difficult it'll be to sustain the attractiveness of your brand in the long term. I obviously understand that certain sellers have different strong suits. So in this day and age, there are also people who are really good at weaponizing their social media presence, or maybe they have a really good eye for designing products. But at the end of the day, I think it is about having a unique vantage point in terms of what consumers are looking for, and then also finding a channel to access those consumers effectively. And for the smaller sellers, avoiding more commoditized products in their approach is going to be an advantage.
Yeah, it's interesting to reflect on a lot of businesses that feel like they're very broad and, very, very big businesses started off very specific. Amazon is indeed the classic example. I believe that Jeff Bezos considered 19 different product categories before hitting on books while he was doing his famous drive across the country from, symbolically from the East Coast where it's all Wall Street and about the numbers, or over to the West Coast where it's about the tech and Silicon Valley thinking. And he hit on books, but that doesn't mean that he never had the ambition. Famously had the ambition from the beginning, didn't he? That the everything store. So I would say to anyone listening who's wanting to do everything, and I meet a lot of them in my travels as a sort of coach and consultant, try and restrict yourself massively to start with, and then you can get a toehold in the market. So let's talk about some of that stuff. Actually, I mean, this is one of the things that established business owners have less. But how narrow or broad can you afford to be? I mean, is extra massively narrow still a sellable business? I mean, can you just sell like 50 variations of effectively one product and still sell that business to somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that most of the brands, for starters, that we're looking at have a pretty low SKU count compared to what I think some people might be expecting. So anywhere from 2 to 30, that's great. Even if, we'll look at businesses with more than 100 SKUs, absolutely. But if a seller can really rank well with a lower number of SKUs, then that makes it even more attractive. And, I've seen large sellers that do maybe, 30 million in revenue or upwards, who haven't necessarily branched out too much. And even though they have maybe a lot of team members at this point, they understand what they're good at, and they continue to kind of be humble and to focus on optimizing that. And I think from a acquisition, from a buyer's point of view, we really respect that focus, because it means that, it's just easier to understand the business and to take it to the next step.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And there's a phrase that a business coach of mine, Taki Moore, used, which is simple scales, complex fails. And yes, of course, there are complex operations already, right? And we all know that. And doubtless your side of acquiring a business and plugging it into an operation is extremely complex. But if the consumer proposition is simple, I guess at least if you've got to talk to other board members, what is the proposition? If you're talking to the consumers, they know what it is you stand for, right? So there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, I know that famously not Jeff Bezos, who am I talking about? Steve Jobs, when he came back to Apple, sort of stripped the number of product lines they offered back, like 90% or something. So that's the classic example, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So tell me a bit about the other things that you think we're good at as small business owners. Let's make ourselves feel good about that. what are the other strengths? So there's that real granular understanding of the market need and being very, very focused. And by the way, $30 million from a really narrow niche is a great wake up call. Thank you for that. What's the next thing?
Yeah, I think one thing that that individual sellers can do really well is to make product adaptations. So have a similar product, but maybe where the size is slightly adjusted to a certain to a certain buyer. Again, using that sensitivity to really meet the market's demands. Also, take the time to read your reviews and see what people are saying about the product, and to take that feedback to to just dig even deeper. Bless you, into your area of expertise. And I think another big area is in product launching. If you're really familiar with the product and it's like your focus and that's your area of expertise, is in that like sub niche, then whenever you come out with a new product, I definitely recommend putting a lot of that energy and personal narrative into that product, how you came up with it, and then having a big bunch of fanfare surrounding the event of launching it in itself, because that's a big opportunity. I mean, we're all aware of the fact that Amazon does kind of help you when you launch a new product. So you want to capitalize on that as a smaller seller to really take that product to the next level. And also, of course, make sure that it's well researched. I wouldn't use the launch phase necessarily as the testing ground for the product. I think you'd want to have some kind of grounds for its success before you do that. And then just really give it all the energy and love that it needs to be successful. That's, I think, an area where smaller sellers can be really good. As a bigger seller, you have a bunch of products that are kind of lined up for launch, and you know, some of them might slip through the cracks, and that's something that, you know, we might not be quite as good at, frankly, in some ways, as the smaller sellers who can really put a lot of thought and energy into each product launch.
That's great stuff. And again, it comes down to leaning into our nature as a small but, you know, fast growing and really beloved company, if you get it right. A couple of things I just want to reflect quickly on that. I think a lot of people don't put any kind of personal narrative into an Amazon type product. They're trying to create a corporate type image because that feels more quite professional. What are your thoughts on that?
That is true. I think that we're moving a little bit into the D2C territory when we talk about, you know, influencer marketing and things like that, and creating that narrative. But you know, I know a seller who's on Amazon who you know, he's doing like a parade type event for one of his product launches, and he's strictly on Amazon. So I think maybe just by even on maybe your homepage or your storefront, by celebrating your product launches a little bit more differently, or maybe even like changing some of the way that you market the brand to reflect how your brand is accommodating a new product, that might be an approach that you could take. Obviously, the objective for a lot of these brands should be that you do have repeat buyers, or people that like the product, that have come to trust it, and will come and revisit your page from time to time to see what else you might have, even if you're unable to contact them directly through an email campaign or through some kind of social media platform. So I still think that you should look for stickiness from your consumers, even if you're just strictly focusing on your Amazon storefront.
Yeah, and I guess that the storefront, talking of which, that there is more and more available that, and we do have the ability to make some visibility through the various, you know, ever-growing plethora of types of advertising that Amazon offers us. Now, I'm always very wary of that from the financial perspective, but if you're launching a new product, I guess what you're saying is you need to get back to some of the traditional way of marketing stuff, which is you really make a you know, it's a PR slash brand awareness or product brand awareness campaign, right? Rather than just going straight for money, which obviously going to make the cash flow work. But I like that bigger picture thinking. And again, I guess if you spend the money up front, as long as it shows up in profits within a few months, then that makes it a more sellable proposition, right? I mean, how much difference? I mean, it's hard to put a financial number on it, but I can see that already the small business owners, one of their strengths is often that they know their numbers, the savvier ones that I work with anyway, and in the mastermind particularly, and they really want to make sure they're getting actual money back when they spend money. And then they're a little bit skeptical, perhaps rightly, of splashy things that cost a lot of time, money, and energy, but don't necessarily have a very measurable ROI. So how, when it comes to the other end of the process, big picture thinking, when they come to talk to you and sell their business to you, how much does that going to affect the multiple or the sellability of a business compared to a business that just does pretty standard launches with a load of PPC, but no kind of PR or big social media backing for it.
So let me see if I understand the question. So
Yeah, that was the world's worst question. Let me rephrase that.
oh, you're fine.
And
You're
so
fine.
it was the longest but most vague question. So how much money am I going to get back if I'm a sort of slightly tight-fisted but savvy Amazon operator? If I
Mhm.
spend a bunch of money on PR and effectively and social media push and trying to build up an email list and things like that to create more of a buzz, quotes unquote, around my product launch versus just selling it on Amazon? How do I justify that cost to myself in terms of the value that it adds to the business exit?
Well, I think here one aspect is that nowadays, as the marketplace is better financed and more competitive, it's not. I think you in many instances you don't have much of an option in terms of spending that money on launch. It's just something that you have to do. And in terms of your evaluation, that's a little bit difficult to answer because a lot of the time, if someone's launching a lot of products, that's not exactly the time when they're looking to exit. I mean, we are buying brands that are launching products, um, but it's difficult for us to price in the value of those products until they're somewhat established or ranked. So I would say that I would do the research and I would invest the money um, because I think that's what it takes now in order to come up with new products. And I think that individual sellers are very good at it, and that's why I kind of emphasize that investment. But personally, I think they would know better than I do, frankly, exactly what that figure is. I just know that it's extremely relevant that that be focused on. That
Great.
makes sense.
Yes, it does. I suppose, but what you're saying is when you're launching, if you're in sort of big product launch mode, you're not quite in preparing to sell mode yet. It's a bit early in the business development sort of process. But also, it sounds like, yeah, what you're saying is pay to play. That is the cost of entry now, even if it wasn't before. And yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, nothing else. People like Accel Pro and many other aggregators I've spoken to are coming with literally billions of dollars of funding, acquiring businesses, and then they're not just sitting there twiddling their thumbs. They've got to justify the investment to their backers, the people funding them, and therefore they're going to grow them aggressively, which means ad spend, listing optimization, and all the other stuff you're talking about.
Yep.
Just one other thing then that strikes me is as another common error that I see. Tell me more about don't use the product launch as the testing ground. How does that show up when it goes wrong, and how should we do it better?
Well, I think that one thing that you can do, and I might be jumping ahead a little bit here, but when you're looking to sell your business, if you have a product that hasn't done too well, you might want to you might frankly want to delist it at a certain point. You just kind of have to acknowledge that some launches just haven't quite worked. Doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. You have to try to find out sometimes. It's like a good joke. If you're a comedian, you've got to get it out there and see if people laugh. There's some of that for sure. Um, but you know, I think yeah, so you just have to see how it goes. And then at a certain point, but it's good to be focused on the SKUs that have been successful after a certain point in time. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
that does make sense. So that, I mean, I suppose that's a very, very valid point. I mean, delisting stuff. I think being willing to let go of things which you've worked really hard to market and they just haven't caught on
Hmm.
is an incredibly hard, it's more of an emotional self-control skill, like the sunk cost fallacy, isn't it? I spent, 2 years of my life and $10 million on this. Well, okay, that'll be a bit extreme for the people I work with, but several hundred thousand would not be unusual over the
Hmm.
course of a couple of years. And you have to go, well, you know what, it's kind of roughly broken even, but it's just not taken off. It's kind of, as Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank says, take it behind the chicken shed and shoot it. I think so. You got to put a time limit on it, haven't you? So, slightly different question is don't use the product launch as a testing ground, which I think is very, very wise advice, by the way. What do you see showing up when that happens? I mean, what are the symptoms of people doing that?
Well, I think what you see when it becomes pretty apparent when you look at a brand and you look at all the products that they've launched, not necessarily their storefront, but if you click on the legal name and all of the products that they've ever launched show up, it's pretty easy to see which assets you're just not interested in acquiring. And and which have generated maybe EBITDA, but which really just don't have much to offer in terms of an acquisition target for a buyer. That's just the reality of the situation. So these have contributed to your P&L, but it's like, it's not what we're buying. What we're buying are the other SKUs that have done significantly well and have ranked well, and which have created a protective moat for the business from the competition.
Okay, so this is a key point we're getting into here now. So they contributed to EBITDA, in other words, or say discretionary earnings, whatever, the bottom line plus add backs, right? The bit that you use as the multiple to then value the business. But you're saying that even if some products are contributed to the bottom line, you're still not that interested in those products. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, the thinking there is that the product doesn't have much of a protective moat against competitors oftentimes. Otherwise, they probably would have ranked higher and they would have had better reviews and they would have started to sell well. So while they do bring in some degree of sales, which if you, which is nice, that's good, but we're not betting on those products 3 or 5 years down the line, the same way that we're betting on the products that have ranked successfully and which do have a large review count. Because we trust that those products will continue to be relevant further into the future. So, and that's what we're basing our multiple off of. If you can, the multiple is basically a projection of future growth. So the higher that growth is into the future, the higher your multiple.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess one person put it to me, I suppose they call themselves an investment bank or sort of basically a sophisticated broker that deals a lot with private equity acquirers, is that they're buying the future, which utterly makes sense as soon as you think about it. But I guess that the tradition that seems to have become, I believe there's like 21 ways of valuing a company, and it seems that everyone in the Amazon acquiring space is obsessed with SDE or EBITDA, depending on the size of the deal, times a multiple. But that's kind of a ridiculous way of in a way it's simple, but we can kind of get wrapped up in the EBITDA number. And I suppose I kind of tend to be pushing people to push that number up all the time. And it's certainly a lot more rational than just pushing revenue. But on the other hand, it's not just about that, it's about that defensibility piece. So that's really something to bear in mind. I think it's a very simple point you're making, but it's somehow easy to lose, isn't it? Do you see, when you have conversations with buyers, how does that kind of part of the conversation go? Tell me about some of the delusions or mistakes that you see out there in the mentality of business owners.
Well, I think that one thing that we encounter is that some people will say, for example, we pumped a lot of money into these ad campaigns and they didn't work out. So we'd like since that affected our profitability, we'd like for you to discount that in your offer. And that puts us in a tricky situation where, maybe it's just difficult to know like what kinds of marketing spends are really mistaken or which ones just don't actually work for that, given that product. And so I think that what you want to do then is you basically want to keep a close eye on your marketing spend, because if you are looking for forgiveness when you spent a whole lot on PPC and it didn't really have a great conversion rate, well, it's not a great negotiating position, frankly. And so you want to kind of keep that reined in and be able to indicate some kind of correlation between spend and conversion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, basically what you're trying to say, I suppose, we're really good at product dev, but we've done a pretty lousy job of cost control. So can we just overlook our incompetence throughout? And I guess that's probably not really what you want to hear, is it? That makes sense to me. So I mean, yeah, ad backs, I suppose, are not going to include stupid marketing spend, as opposed to things that are like an asset that you buy that's going to last for the next 5-10 years, like an intellectual property protection or a trademark that lasts for 20 years or whatever it is, right? So a little bit different.
Michael, if I may, I just want to jump in quickly and say that at the same time, we do understand that a lot of these sellers have their hands very full, and what we've done is we've created an option to help them deal with some of these hiccups that might have taken place in the past through reevaluation. I don't know if you'd like to revisit that later in the call, or I can just explain what that is right now, whatever it is, but I just like to kind of inject that quickly.
Good point. So in other words, if we've made mistakes, you can kind of find a way of working around that. Let's keep that for the next episode, partly because I'm being sneaky and wanting to have an open loop there so that people listen to it. But also, I think we're going to be talking about deal structure and valuation in the next episode, which is really important stuff. So thank you for that.
Sure.
We'll come back to the revaluation piece. So you can be forgiven, folks, and listen up to the next episode to find how you gain forgiveness. So coming back to then the basic question of what do small business owners offer, or attractive, good, well-run small businesses in this space offer? What are the other things that you think people can get really right? Sorry, let me ask a better question. What things do people generally have as a strength as a small business owner in this space, and can they lean into?
I think I would so there are a couple other points, a couple other ways that you can really set yourself apart from the other small businesses, if you will, if you're looking to exit in particular. So one of them is having really quality customer service, or keeping a good close eye on that. A lot of the best brands, I don't know which comes first, the chicken or the egg in many instances, but a lot of the best brands will realize that one thing they pride themselves on is how good their customer service is. And it turns out that that also kind of validates a lot of the other ways that they run the business, just from like a management perspective. Just it clarifies that their approach is very kind of rigorous, because it means that they cover the transaction with the client really from the very beginning, where they launch the product or source the product, all the way until even the client is maybe currently using the product. I spoke to a seller who was basically, the buyer was out in a different country and the product didn't work. So he had a product shipped across the ocean from the US to that client to replace it. It wasn't necessarily a super expensive item, but that was a great move from a PR perspective. But I think having those kinds of values in place within your organization is definitely worthwhile. Another thing that I think is really important is to be consistent with your pricing, and to definitely not engage in any kind of brazen like pricing wars or slashing your margins. It's good to be confident in your brand, even if things go up and down a little bit. It's good to be confident that you're not going to stoop to the level of maybe some of the competitors, and that your brand will be able to ride any kind of price war storms that it might encounter. Again, I would emphasize the focus and aspect. I mean, there's different situations. I think there's basically two approaches here. One is know what you're really good at and focus on it. Sometimes that does end up being scaling. So if you're really good at Amazon and you don't want to have the hassle of going into brick and mortar, which that is a huge hassle that I don't think that think people really need to be to really think about those kinds of decisions in advance carefully. And again, I've seen very big stores that just haven't gone into brick and mortar, or haven't even gone into other platforms because they don't think they have the bandwidth for it. But alternatively, if you have a product that you think maybe is a smaller niche, but where a lot of other people from different platforms would appreciate having access to, then maybe that's something you could focus on. But it's thinking about your capabilities before you take a certain initiative. I think that's very important, because a lot of these things, if it's an initiative that you didn't follow through on, that will be reflected in your P&L at some point. And that'll lead to questions, and then that'll just basically won't reflect well on your business.
Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. I suppose what you're saying is focus on what you're good at in the very simple words. And I guess the encouragement, part of the sort of theme that's emerging today is be really focused. That's where the value comes from. So if you try 10 different platforms and 10 of them don't work, but 2 of them take off, if you leave it for long enough, that shows up in a positive way in the P&L, right? But if you sort of half digested an abortive Walmart launch, you then decide to pull the plug on, and then you try and sell the business within a few months after that, I guess that's going to look less attractive, right? So in other words, you're kind of offering a half-formed thing. And I think you're right. People, again, this is like a subset of the same discussion, which is about the focus level that you can afford to have and still have a big, valuable business. So if you're saying that somebody's doing $30 million by having a pretty narrow product niche or consumer type they focus on, I guess you're saying similarly with the sales channels can afford to be pretty narrow, because Amazon has so much bandwidth if you really take off on it, that we don't need to obsess about expanding. I mean, to that point, just a couple of examples. They're not actually, neither of them I think has sold the businesses. One business owner I work with, they got to at least, I think, 8 figures, probably like 20-25 million dollars a year run rate, and they were selling the UK and Europe. They didn't sell in the US. Not only that, they tried the US and they'd shut it down years previously. So they really refocused their money into an area which is traditionally not seen as a big market, but $25 million is big enough. And mostly, UK, Germany, and a little bit from the rest of Europe. And now the temptation would be to say, oh, well, if you took that to the USA, you'd make $100 million. Well, maybe, but only if you had sort of a $30 million line of credit. So this interesting, isn't it, that all that glitters is not gold, and that shiny object syndrome happens a lot in internet marketing because we're all marketed at to try. And I'm guilty of being part of those people that saying, oh, you could do this and you could do that. Okay, so yeah, thank you. Good reality check. Stay focused. What are the other things that people are good at doing in they're small business owners in the FBA space? What are the strengths that they should be leaning into to make their business more sellable?
Well, I think that one other area that people it's worth thinking about is maybe task delegation, but also not spreading it out too far. So once these brands start to grow past maybe a couple 100,000 in EBITDA, a lot of the time they'll engage maybe like an employee or maybe 2 or 3 employees. And fundamentally, I think that that's actually good, because when we buy a business, it can be a little bit troubling or challenging if all the know-how is basically just with the owner of the brand. And that goes from sourcing all the materials, all the connections, all the personal relationships, and also all the familiarity with marketing. If it's all in one place, that can be challenging for us. Whereas if you are able to delegate a little bit and share some of the responsibility with a small team as the business gets bigger, without ballooning the team out of control either, I think that actually makes the business even more attractive to us, because we can bring on maybe 2 or 3 key members, or maybe more, depending on the business, and know that you've done a responsible job at delegation within the business. So I think that's something that we really appreciate. So
that makes a lot of sense. I was going to say just a couple of points. First of all, yeah, I was just this morning working with my VA just within the amazing FBA business, not an e-commerce context, but the same difference. I was just thinking, there's an issue with what we're doing with some of our marketing, and I was thinking, I haven't trained them up in the system that we're using called Carter, which is a CRM and quite sort of complex system. And I thought, this is going to end up back on my desk, but it shouldn't, because I have a team member who's capable, who's got the right background. That's why I hired him to do this kind of thing. And I thought, this is an example where it's all dependent on me. And I guess a lot of Amazon business owners up to a certain size really are in exactly the same boat, that they know a lot of stuff. And yes, they may have written SOPs, but that's not the same as really having a feel for how things work and the experience. So I can totally see that, one is the loneliest number in business, they say, right? That's a risk factor for you guys. But you said also that let's look at the opposite side of that equation. Don't balloon the team out of control either. I've seen one of the business owners in the mastermind, the 10K collective mastermind of the same name as the podcast, recently exited with a business where he had almost no staff. It was about just getting close to that $200,000 a year EBITDA times 2 brands, which is interesting. That number turns up. So maybe depending on your profit level, $1 million sort of revenue rate. But I've also seen a business doing about $1 million level, where they had hired staff to the point where they pushed their profit EBITDA to about 5% or something. So there's obviously the opposite extreme. How do we find that sweet spot in the middle of those extremes?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think actively trying to automate what tasks you can by using either technology or analytics is very helpful. But then the issue though now is that in order to really be competitive, I think it's important to be present, like to have a lot of different features to the brand, and to be, have a sophisticated marketing, or have sophisticated, be working on a website, for example, or doing different things. So I think it's just having very, very clear and specific assignment of responsibilities to the team that you have. Because the other thing that, in every business, they say the efficiency of employees drops drastically as the business expands. And if it's very unclear who does what, and and all of that, it's going to make the transition process more difficult. So I think it's just really about clarity. If you're going to hire somebody, I would just be very, very clear about what exactly their responsibilities are before you do it, and make sure that they kind of stand to the or stick to those expectations, and just kind of manage expectations very carefully with your employees. I think that that's the key. And then also, I think the big difference here for a lot of sellers is they hit a certain size and they're no longer the product designer that they were at the outset of the brand. They're not really the marketing genius that they might have been at the beginning of the brand. They're really a CEO of a business. And that requires that they really be involved with the personnel on a different level, and that they give the personnel some space, but also are very proactive and meeting their needs in the same way that a CEO of a major corporation would, and not just kind of, I don't know, divvying out tasks randomly without a whole lot of specified kind of responsibilities associated with each individual and their role.
Yeah, when you put that don't divvy out tasks randomly, it sounds incredibly obvious and kind of embarrassing. And yet I've certainly been there, and I've seen that quite a lot, that I think people in the early stages, all I would say is a reflection of what the behaviors I've seen amongst business owners is I would either sell the business at the point where you aren't going to have to, you were about to have to buy in some labor and become manager and develop that entire skill set. Hiring itself is an art, right? HR departments exist and they don't even manage people, except if there's a problem they hire people. But I think there's so much in that you either need to grasp it completely or just let it go. And I literally, the biggest exit I've seen recently, with nice, valuable, multiple, very high EBITDA because I had no staff getting in the way of the profit, and really great branding because he was really good at branding, good at product dev. And that sold quickly and for a very, very high multiple. That was an example of a success where he completely avoided becoming a manager because he tried it, didn't like it, wasn't his bag. Equally, I know businesses like biggest business I personally worked with has probably got 60, 70 employees, and not all full time. They're pretty big, and they also, had that kind of culture of great team building. But as you say, it's that falling between stools is when you want to avoid it, I think.
Yep. And no, those businesses where they're well organized definitely fetch for a better multiple, and that's great to see. 100%.
Yeah,
I think a lot of the time the people who come to us on many occasions who are looking to sell, it doesn't necessarily have to do ideally with, say, the profit. Obviously we're not looking to buy businesses that are going down in value. Really the most legitimate, any reason is legitimate, I guess, if you would like to sell your business. But what I like to hear, frankly, is that the person doesn't want to keep running the business more for personal reasons, or because they don't want to become the CEO or managing director of their business anymore. They want to maybe sell this business and then go back to being a product designer, maybe launch a different brand, because again, they know what they're good at, and that's what they're good at, not necessarily being delegating lots of tasks to other people for a brand that's continues to grow very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are the odd people like Jeff Bezos who were the CEO, startup CEO, and then move on to being the sort of big picture CEO. But even the great Steve Jobs, often touted as Mr. Success Story, didn't really get it in the early days. He moved from a startup where he was extraordinary, along with Steve Wozniak, let's not forget, to really struggling with the corporate world and not understanding corporate politics and all the stuff that goes with it. And yes, we're not talking that sort of level of size of company, but even if you've got a team of 10 people, you've got to manage some dynamics in there. So yeah, I think you're right. I suppose what we're saying is it's a different skill, and you're either willing to plunge in there or you just should get out. And as you say, it's completely legit to sell multiple businesses if you're really good at creating them. I mean, I know a couple of people like that. So there's quite a lot of things we could cover, but I guess we ought to get on to business valuation and deal structure in a minute. So let's summarize what you guys offer and what you guys are looking for. Obviously, you acquire businesses in the Amazon space. What kind of businesses do you get, and how do you help people on the way?
Absolutely. So we're looking for any businesses with at least around $500,000 in profitability. So if that's EBITDA or SDE, that's fine. We're also looking at D2C brands now as well. But again, the key here is that they are profitable. we are not looking at supplements or products or brands that have products that are very R&D intensive. So I don't know if it's some kind of complex like microscope or some kind of complex electronic device. That's just not our area of expertise. We're not going to acquire that kind of business. And then also products that are in the fashion space as well. It's not our area of expertise. And we're looking for products that are generally considered evergreen with minimal or lower seasonality. And then, we have, it's important that it be profitable and that margins be at least at 15%. And that's the main criteria. We're really very much niche agnostic still at this point. Now we have a presence in many niches. So, we're definitely eager to look at brands as long as they meet those stated criteria.
Great. So on reasonably sort of chunky sized businesses and margin of 15% plus. I mean, I think that there's a common theme that, people will, there are different aggregators out there who specialize in different types of businesses, and the size of business varies a bit, although it seems like the minimum that I've come across is about $150,000, $200,000 EBITDA, but the margin range of say 20%, sometimes 15%, you guys are a bit more flexible, seems to be quite common. So I'd just say it's a heads up to all the business owners out there. If you've got margins of 5%, 10% in this kind of product, in a private label type product, rather than manufacturing sector, where obviously the margins are traditionally a lot lower, this may be a wake-up call to look at your business, in my view. So what is it you can offer listeners? Obviously, if somebody's listening and they have a business, they're not yet sold it, they're not necessarily even in the throes of the selling process, but they're considering it. What can you offer those guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I think first up, we understand that people are very much interested in the payout, and the reality is that we do pay more than a lot of other buyers. So that's one factor right off the bat that I think that's worth considering. And if you come to us directly as well, you can learn about our operational expertise and how we'll grow the business, especially throughout that earnout period. Our standard deal does consist of a 2-year revenue-based earnout. And so we want to share with you how we're going to grow the brand, and so that you can really conceptualize for yourself how important that earnout is, and how big that upside is, and how we can kind of share our expertise with you so that becomes apparent. Also, we do a revenue-based earnout, which means that we allow many buyers traditionally would do an EBITDA or profit or SDE based earnout, meaning that any increase in your EBITDA over that 2-year period, that's what they would pay that earnout on. And we don't do that because what we found is that sometimes an operator might decide to invest a lot back into the business, which actually decreases margins. And then that would actually negatively impact your earnout. And oddly enough, what happens is that 2-year earnout period is the period where they're investing a lot in order to scale it and grow it. And then right when the earnout period is over, the business kind of blows up because it benefits from that prolonged period of investment and scaling. And so we do it differently. We stick to revenue so that even if the margins suffer a little bit as we invest our resources and money into the brand, you continue to benefit from that top line. Also, it's from an auditing point of view, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to understand maybe why the EBITDA hasn't grown as much as it should. Maybe it was because the buyer invested a lot into certain kinds of expensive software, who knows? But you'd basically have to run an audit to see if those expenses were legitimate. With the top line, it's just super clear. I mean, you could basically look at our Seller Central account, just see what that number is, see how much it's increased over the 1-year period, calculate the difference for yourself. That's your earnout after year 1. And then do the same thing after year 2. It's very, very clear. And it allows us to just mercilessly invest into your brand so that it grows as much as possible right after we acquire it, which is what we're looking to do. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I have to say that is unique. I've not come across anyone who's got an earnout structure that way. And yeah, having in much smaller scale been involved with various different types of deal structures with Amazon businesses over the years, not buying so much as managing or joint ventures or co-owned businesses. really revenue is easy to measure, and everything else requires an awful lot of discussion, and you end up wrapped up in discussion rather than focusing on growing the business. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And also the fact that you're going to invest in growth aligns the interests of the seller who wants to get their money and run after 2 years, versus you guys who want to grow something really valuable and presumably, you know, roll it up into a big public offering and make out like bandits, as they say, or, you know, or sell it on to somebody else for a massive multiple, you know, a good profit and a multiple of what you invested. So it makes sense from both points of view. It's quite an elegant, simple solution. I mean, sometimes I'm sure the great deal of thought and analysis has gone into this at a very sort of professional level, but in the end, sometimes simplest solutions turn out to be the best as well. It's old Occam's razor, I'm proud to say, an Englishman from the 13th century came up with the idea that the simplest solution is often the best. Well, look, Hugh, this has been very, very interesting stuff. Lots of simple but profound insights, which I think are really actionable. So really good stuff. So if people want to check you out, then if you go to amazingfba.com/Accel Pro, that's ACCEL Pro, PRO, then they can also book in, I believe, a consultation and get a valuation from you guys as well. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
And what will you consult with them about? What will they find out from that conversation?
Yeah. So what we'll normally, our process is that we'll have about a 30 minutes to an hour long conversation. At that point, if they decide that they'd like an evaluation, we'll sign an NDA, and they'll share at least 18 months of financials. They'll send their P&L, and then normally within 2, maximum 3 business days, we'll come back to them with a potential offer. And then if they decide to accept that offer, our due diligence period normally doesn't last longer than 3 weeks. After due diligence is completed, then there's the signing of the asset purchase agreement, which is where we transfer or exchange the funds for the business assets. And the transaction is really complete at that point. So, but for the evaluation, yeah, it's just a 30-45 minute call, signing the NDA, and then sharing your financials. And we'll come back to you with either, you know, a very attractive offer, or we can also kind of help coach you, because it's not always, you know, tomorrow isn't necessarily the best day to sell your business. But I'd be happy to be a resource to you, and maybe we can have a discussion about when that exit time would be ideal for your business, and maybe how we can help you to prepare for that.
Yeah, and it's always useful. I would say to anyone listening, you know, and with due respect to you, Hugh, and the guys at Accel Pro, or indeed any other aggregator or even business broker out there, you don't have to, you know, sell your business after 2 weeks of conversations with somebody. I think it's great for educating yourself to go and have conversations with experts who spend their entire days, as Hugh does, evaluating businesses, to have that reality check from an external source. And it's one an opinion. And frankly, I would suggest anyone listening or watching should go and get multiple opinions. But at least you're getting an opinion of an external party. Yes, they're not neutral in their viewpoint, but it's not just you and your internal team trying to make an evaluation about a business which you're in. You can't see the wood for the trees, I think. So for me, these are important conversations for any business owner. So Hugh, great stuff. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing that. We're going to quickly go over business valuation and deal structure. I say quickly, I mean, it's obviously a hugely involved area, but we'll sort of do a whistle stop tour of that. But for now, I just want to say a big thank you for coming on the show and sharing some really, really helpful insights.
Thank you, Michael. It's my pleasure.
Okay, that's recording done. So if you're listening up, if you're watching on the live, then we are now going to get into Amazon business valuation and deal structure. You okay for time, Hugh? You okay to keep going?
Yep.
Amazing. Let's do this thing then. Sorry that I got overexcited and made comments on everything you said, but mind you, they are hopefully of some kind of value. They're based on real life experience.
Oh, you're good.
Interesting to hear what you're saying as well, that how that sort of on my side of the fence sort of chimes in what the errors I'm seeing. I'm like, hopefully, yeah, I'm not going completely mad when I'm advising people, which is good to know. Right then, let's do round 2. Ladles and jelly spoons, boys and girls, welcome back to the 10K Collective podcast, the place to be for 6, 7, and 8-figure Amazon sellers, a subset of the Amazing FBA podcast series, or series of channels, I should say. Today we are talking to Hugh from Accel Pro. Accel Pro is a buyer and operator of Amazon brands, and they use their own unique in-house tech to optimize and scale the brands once they've bought them. But different from just outsourcing it all to an Amazon agency. That's pretty common, I can say. So that's immediately a differentiator there. They've got offices in China, US, data engineering in Eastern Europe, and their HQ is in Amsterdam. And Hugh is their acquisition specialist. So he's the person who negotiates with sellers who want to sell their businesses. And today we're going to talk about deal structures. So first of all, welcome back to the show, Hugh. Thanks for coming on.
Michael, very happy to be here. Thank you.
So let's talk about deal structure. What are the basics of deal structure? Why do we even have to use the word structure? I mean, surely you're going to buy my business. You tell me what the number is. At some point, I hand my business over to you. You hand me the money and we're done, right? Or is it not that simple?
It's not quite that simple normally because, well, we try to keep it as simple as possible, but there's, we do include an earnout period, and we view it as really as an opportunity for the seller to, the first thing is it allows them to convey their conviction in the brand's growth. So frankly, if someone is shy of, of the earnout component, I'm almost thinking, why should we give you a large cash out closing component, offer to the deal if you don't think it's really worth that much. And it allows us to just basically say, listen, just hold our hand while we grow this thing and benefit from something that you've obviously invested a whole lot into for so many years. So we just view it as basically an added opportunity to make money from your business, but without having to be hyper involved in it, so that you can move on to whatever it is that you'd like to do, if that be a vacation or a different business, whatever that may be. Yeah, does that answer your question?
I think it does, but I mean that brings up an interesting question. So you're saying you're shy of the earnout. Why should we give you a large cash at closeout? Which I can understand is a very valid question. The flip side of that question is, I guess, to be a bit challenging, that surely the buyer so the seller of the business might say, yeah, but I don't trust you guys to necessarily grow this. A lot of aggregators have come into existence within the last 12 months or 24 months. They haven't got years of experience of operating Amazon businesses necessarily, and they don't necessarily trust them to grow the value of the business. So what's your response to that sort of counter?
Well, that's a great question, and I wholeheartedly encourage it, because I think that that's something, when I talk about Accel Club or pitch the company, it's not because we just buy brands. That's not what I take a whole lot of pride in, although I think we do a great job at that. I think that what the really fantastic part of the organization that I work for is how excellently we operate them after we've acquired them, and how we're able to give these brands the exposure, scaling, strategic financing that they need to go on and dominate in their niche, and to go on to compete against the ever-growing number of large players in the space that they're probably working in, and to allow them to make money from that at the same time. So I'm more than happy to explain the inner workings of our operations team. To say that, obviously, I'm not a seller myself, but the brand managers that we dedicate to each acquisition have experience operating brands for many years. And, we have PPC specialists, people who have lots of years of experience working in this space. So I wouldn't say, while me and my team, yeah, we are a little bit not exactly Amazon natives per se, although, some of us have some degrees of working with Amazon businesses, but the operations team, on the other hand, has lots and lots of experience in the space.
Yeah, that's good to know. And I would say that the acquisitions team, their job isn't to operate the businesses. So it's kind of not relevant, really. They need to make accurate business valuation decisions, I guess, that benefit both parties, right? But also, tell me a bit about the fact that you develop what you call native tech, so in-house tech, because I think that is important. A lot of acquirers do indeed outsource the management of a lot of operations straight away to the sort of white labeling, effectively, although they're not kind of telling the seller, maybe they are, maybe they're not, but they're effectively white labeling agencies. And I know, because I speak to the heads of agencies who reveal that they are working with certain aggregators who I'm not going to name for legal reasons. But so why does that matter, and what do you guys do different?
Sure, yeah. So I remember when I was, first starting off with Accel Club at the beginning of 2021, and we had just kind of come out with a couple acquisitions and another fundraise and a bit of PR. And I was getting contacted a lot by these, basically these data specialist organizations that were offering to build out a data infrastructure for us and all that. And I went to the CEO, to Max, and I was like, hey, do we want to buy this? And he said, Hugh, no, that's what we do. We're going to take care of that ourselves. And he comes from, this is Max Fiersau, who he built a company which was acquired by Yandex. It's now doing over $1 billion in revenue and scaled it from the bottom up, and using technology to do that. And so what he's done is he's taken a lot of his contacts and a lot of other resources that we have to basically build our own team, which basically synchronizes all of the data from every store that we operate, puts it all into one place that they can kind of help each other out and work in synchronicity. And then it helps us, from basically to optimize the operations side, be that from PPC to sourcing products, to task management. It's really all in one place. And if we need to program or develop another component to do that, we have a whole team of engineers right there who are willing and ready to do that as necessary. So we've really been doing everything in-house from day one. And I think that that's going to be a huge benefit to us, because it allows us to really tweak and adjust the engine that we're building to meet the needs of each acquisition that we make. So I think that's going to be a huge critical competitive advantage for us, and it already is.
Yeah, that does make sense. And it's interesting that we're talking about operations when we're in a episode where we're dealing with the segment of valuation and deal structure. But actually, I guess what we're talking is a little bit further into the future. Last episode, we were talking about how to build value in your business as the business owner, I guess, therefore, by definition, prior to exit, prior to selling. And then we are kind of now looking into the future of the business and deciding, if you're going to work in cooperation with each other for, I guess, 2 years is the standard earnout. By the sound of it, you do the same.
That's right.
That there is therefore a lot more trust on both sides needed. Like, you need to say, if you're not willing to see a 2-year future projection of growth for your business, why would we buy it? And the seller's saying to you, well, okay, but how do we know you're going to do it? So this is very interesting. So we talked about the deal structure before. So you mentioned, I think it's worth just reiterating quickly that your earnout is based on revenue rather than EBITDA. So can you just quickly restate why that matters?
Yep, absolutely. So yes, what we do is there's a cash at closing component, which is based off of an EBITDA or profitability multiple, which is standard. A year from that cash at closing date, there's a first earnout payment, which is based on the revenue growth over that 1-year period. So that's generally anywhere from maybe 5, 20 or upwards of that revenue surplus. And then a year from that, there's a second payment. So if you think about the revenue growth potential of your brand over 2 years, it's quite significant. And that's your second earnout payment. And the reason why we do that based off of revenue is because it's the most obvious, transparent metric that we can use for the client. And it also allows us to invest our capital into the business to even at the expense of its profitability without impacting the payout to the client that they would experience if they had an EBITDA or SDE based earnout.
Yeah, and I've got to say that makes total sense for me, because one of the issues that's always struck me about that whole earnout structure with other people, and I think this is pretty unique. I've not come across another, when I say unique, somebody would be copying it tomorrow, the way that the aggregators work. It's a lot of monkey see, monkey do in any space, and there's no different in this space. But what it does mean is that for me, if I were acquiring a business, first thing and my plan was to buy it for, say, $10 million, I don't know, let's say 200,000 EBITDA and a multiple of let's say 5x, quite generous, so it's $1 million business value, and I would want to sell it. I would want to massively grow it and then sell it for a higher multiple down the line if I were going to resell it. I don't know anything about IPOs, so I couldn't speak to that, but that makes sense to me. Therefore, the first thing you're going to do is invest like crazy, and obviously that's going to hit the bottom line. So that there is always been that tension in my mind. So that makes total sense to me that you've got a bit more alignment between where you want to go. There's less of a tension between why the heck have you spent my, if you're the seller, why have you spent my earnout dollars on growing the brand? Where you're going, well, of course we want to grow the flipping brand. That's why we bought it in the first place. So that does make sense. Now, we talked in the last episode, we sneakily put a bit of an open loop in there. And if we said, look, if you've managed to spend, I've got a client, I recently had this exact situation where they've had every single month they've had a profit since, almost day one, until I think last November, when they spent so much on PPC, or rather the agents that they'd employed to do it, they spent so much on PPC, they actually had one of their biggest sales months and actually had a loss. So that was a big hiccup, and that's not unheard of, and everyone makes mistakes. And then, of course, that sort of dings the evaluation, and you think, do I wait another 12 months before I sell? And how do we deal with that? So you've got a bit of a way of handling that. How does that work for you guys?
Yep, absolutely. So we offer what we call a reevaluation. So what that means is, say for example, that you had a hiccup, maybe a supply chain hiccup over the last summer. Let's take, I don't know, June, for example. And we're negotiating right now about the sale of your business at the beginning of 2022, but you're aware that that hiccup in June of last year will negatively impact your EBITDA. And so you're thinking, do I sell now, understanding that, anything could happen? Maybe there's another hiccup in the future, and it's just, who knows? Let's just sell. I want to sell, so let's sell the business now and just kind of acknowledge that I messed up and just kind of move forward. Or what we offer is a current evaluation. So we'll select a multiple. We will purchase the business. So we'll buy the business, and but we'll add basically a condition, which is that we will reevaluate the business within 6 months. So that means that in June of this year, which would be roughly about 12 years from when that mistake took place, we will reevaluate your business, and whatever the difference is, we will pay you on top. So basically it's a very substantial increase, potential increase. And the other thing too is that over that 6-month period, we'd very likely give you the option to help us manage the business. So that would help us to kind of integrate it into our portfolio. And that would also give you the opportunity to take our resources and deploy the brand, and then also get paid from that at the end of the day. So I think it's a really, really useful tool. And I think it works for everybody, because if you're already in the headspace where you're ready to exit the business, we give you the option to do that and to kind of have clarity on that situation, but not at the expense of a mistake or a hiccup that took place a few months ago.
Yeah, there's a certain momentum and a certain sort of arc that you're on when you're heading towards exit, right? This is different from just if you're growing it. So it's very awkward to sort of quasi put the business on ice for 6 more months. So that's a very powerful option. I guess that the immediate thing that springs to mind is the seller going, yeah, but and I guess that requires quite a lot of trust in you guys. I mean, how do you sort of, without having to get into the nuts and bolts of lawyers or anything like that, how do you give sellers the confidence in that structure?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the way that it works is that we could perhaps have, I'd have to clarify that with our legal team. Actually, I don't want to say something out of place, but I know that this instrument is something that, we're not the first ones to do it by any means. We obviously have our US based legal team with a legal entity there. So we would, basically be legally obligated to do that. And I think the main thing here is you would just want to be very clear about what's calculated in the EBITDA for both calculations, frankly. So if you're, say, on a salary over that 6-month period, we would want that probably to be deductible from your EBITDA, because that way you can't, or we just discussed that. We'd want to negotiate that. Those things would need to be clear from the outset. So there's maybe a little bit of an element of really discussing how EBITDA will be calculated given your salary expectations. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward, frankly. It's just, we put money into the business, you grow it, and then within a certain amount of time, we reevaluate it, and whatever the difference is, we pay it out to you at once.
I mean, it certainly is, as a conceptual way of getting around the problem and keeping the momentum going. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yep.
So let's talk about value then. Business valuation, multiples. It seems to be the way that everyone values it in this situation. Even though I remember Jeff Bezos saying that if we get a choice of valuation methods, we'll take the discounted future cash flows. So it's not the only, or even necessarily on the surface of it, the most rational way to value a business. But multiples seem to be here to stay. So tell me about the history of multiples. Over 2021, they seem to be going up a lot. Where do you feel that they're going over the next 12, 24 months? We're talking at the beginning of 2022 here.
Sure, yeah. So I think to understand this question, it makes sense to actually maybe back up a little bit. So I think, if we look at the beginning of, and I'll get a little bit macro here, but I think I think it's worthwhile or necessary. Um, at the beginning of 2021, we were dealing with a lot of, basically people were anticipating a lot of inflation in the global markets. And so what happens under those instances is that a lot of money basically moves out of bonds or fixed income securities into the private equity or the equity markets. And what we saw in the US was that the private equity markets basically had a record breaking year last year, hit about 72 billion, I believe, and then actually started to taper off in November as people understood that interest rates would be increasing. So uh, with interest rates increasing, a lot of that money kind of moves back out of private equity into the back into bonds and back into fixed income securities. And so we're already seeing that. It's already clear as day. And so obviously, the e-commerce market is going to be affected as well. It's a good, 13 billion is a good chunk of that 72 billion estimate of private equity spend. And we're already seeing at least, that impact the market. And so, yeah, I think what people can expect is that over the next coming months, there's definitely going to be a correction. I think it's just inevitable, really. But then what we might see is that if fixed income securities can offer, or bonds can offer an extremely attractive coupon, right? Then some of that money might kind of move back into private equity again, but it will be more selective. And that's kind of the key point here, is that it's not the same rush that we experienced over the summer. These are people that are very aware and very calculating about the profitability of the private equity asset that they're purchasing. And so I think that people can really expect to see a correction in the short term in multiples, a potential long term increase, but with added selectivity in terms of the asset quality moving forward.
Makes a lot of sense. So in other words, really there is even more value in being really, really good at what you do, but less value in being sort of quite good at what you do by the sound of it. So it's worth doubling down on an excellent business. And if you've got a mediocre business, it sounds like now could be the time to, well, I'll say mediocre business, probably not something anyone would want to acquire, but good, but not outstanding business. But let's talk about what the factors are that create good versus outstanding. What are the factors that are going to push the multiple up, despite the fact that the overall market may be correcting downwards somewhat? How can we individually pull some levers, and what are those levers to push that multiple up and the value of our businesses up?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, overall, I think the market is, of course, gonna grow. That's why we're in it. And I think the big opportunity here is to focus on brands that are always catering to the hyper niches where consumers are just very interested in unique products, and coming up with a good way to provide those products to buyers. Individual sellers are just fantastic at that, and we're reliant on them to be able to do that, and to continue to be creative in that way. And we really, our job in many ways is, I talk to some sellers who say, shoot, if I'd sold one of my brands a few years ago, I could have put that money into my other brand and grown that 3 times as fast. And I think there's a way for us all to work in synchronicity, with the understanding that a lot of the creative superpower is held in the hands of the individual third-party sellers, and that once they've brought a brand to a certain plateau and it's kind of off its training wheels, our capability is really scaling it and making sure that it's a very robust business. I kind of like to think of it sometimes as the era of the aircraft carrier might be over, in the sense that these huge retail companies are really just kind of too slow and behemoth like for the e-commerce space. The small sellers play an important kind of quick paced role, and the aggregators are kind of like the frigate class, if you will, like very medium sized, lean, fast, well funded. And we all kind of play a certain role that I think is crucial to bringing the consumer the best quality service and the best quality products.
That the era of the aircraft carrier is over. Well, in an era of geopolitical tensions, that's quite interesting.
I don't know. Yeah,
I like the way of thinking. That I mean, it's interesting. So metaphors can help sort of clarify create a sort of mental picture of a space that we're operating in. And I think it's really, really important to do that. That's why I keep having a lot of aggregators and business brokers on the show, even for people who are listening who won't ever sell their business, because I think understanding the space you're operating in and the bigger picture financial drivers really can enable us to, quote, see round the corner. And I remember that's like one of the definitions of a CEO is somebody who can see around the corner, see what's coming in the market and position the business to ride the waves, whether that means lower multiples, higher multiples, whatever the operators are. And yeah, I think the agility of small business owners is great. And I guess agility can also lead to a lack of focus, can it? So it could be the sort of shiny object syndrome, could be the downside, the dark side of the agility of ability to change, is that sometimes we change stuff that we shouldn't. So tell me about the stuff that we shouldn't be changing and the other factors that push the multiples down if we're not careful.
Sure, yeah. So I think focus is absolutely key if you're a smaller business. Really emphasizing the things that you're good at, and really thinking down, like sitting down and thinking about what is it that my brand is really good at, or that I'm good at bringing to my brand. And I think that's sometimes a pretty personal question, and I think that maybe can give you some clarity. But I really doubling down on that. I think focusing on the consumer again and using your proximity to the consumer, being able to relate to them. I mean, oftentimes if you came up with a product, maybe you just researched it, but that's great too. A lot of the time it's because you in some area kind of needed it probably in your own personal life. So that gives you a lot of access to understanding what adaptations you could maybe make, and how to present it more conveniently to a buyer so they don't have to go way out of their way in order to discover that it exists or that it's available to them. So these are all big advantages that third-party sellers have and will continue to have. And really doubling down on those capabilities, I think, will just always lead to continued success. So yeah.
I like that a lot. And it's a very positive message, but a very realistic one. You're the person at the sharp end of actually literally deciding how much you're going to buy, what the actual commercial value is of a business, not just some kind of woo-woo happy thinking. You actually put money where your mouth is, or literally you put your company's money anyway. And yeah, just to reflect on that, I think the overall thing that I'm getting back is that a small business owner is in a great position to tweak the product to match the market very precisely and to tweak the marketing. Whereas, the traditional big picture companies, I guess they're not quite as bad as back in the Mad Men days of the 60s, where you had people who created products like cigarettes and then had a bunch of people selling them who knew nothing about cigarettes, knew nothing about consumers, and just came up with, they were just very, very good at marketing. But there was an absolute separation between the consumers, the producers, and the marketing people, right? They lived in different worlds. They didn't care about each other. And in the case of advertising cigarettes, obviously you clearly don't care about your product, the consumer's welfare. So there's a real, that connection piece is, I think, really great. And I think it's really great to understand that and to lean into that as business owners, that we don't let go of that piece, but that we lean into it. So really uplifting thing to hear. In measurable financial terms, that's really great. So tell us, we ought to wrap this one up. So tell us what services you offer to business owners. What do you do for people in general, and specifically what can you offer them if they want to take the next step and have a chat to you?
Yep. So we will offer excellent exit terms to Amazon sellers and D2C business owners, with the understanding and guarantee that we will run their business very responsibly. We are very intent on taking all these brands to the next level. We're confident that you'll be able to find your product that you help to create and to develop and to sell in every store, marketplace conceivable, and that will run the business excellently, and that you'll receive excellent exit terms as well, and that we'll work with you to make sure that fits your personal situation and your timeline, and to make that process as smooth as possible.
Excellent. And for those who are interested in particularly business valuation, we talked about multiples and how changeable that is. So something to keep an eye on. How can you help people who want to find out what the value of their business is right now?
Yep. So you can come to our website, accelclub.pro, and then you can go to the contact us page. There's a short questionnaire. It's very brief. If you just enter your information. I'll follow up with you, or one of our other business development managers will, and we'll have a short 30-minute conversation. And that's really kind of like a micro evaluation, if you will, and also an opportunity for us to just get to know each other a bit. And then we'll take it from there. We'll establish what your timeline is, why you're looking to sell, what your expectations are from an exit. And then if you're ready to receive a formal offer, we'll request your financials, and then within 2 to 3 days, we'll have presented the business at our investment committee, and we'll come back to you with a formal offer and an LOI.
Right. So you can move. Yeah, I was going to say letter of intent. Yeah.
Yep.
You can move pretty quickly then, by the sound of it. I mean, I guess that's traditionally one of the virtues of an aggregator. I would say, and this isn't necessarily, forgive me, Hugh, in your direct interest, but I would say in the interest of the consumers of this content and the listeners who own businesses, so the people who I'm working on their behalf, I would say this: like, go and talk to people. You don't have to necessarily go straight to getting an offer, but go and talk to people and inform yourself. Hugh's, gentle soul. He's not going to hard sell you like a used car salesman, and anybody responsible isn't going to do that either. They recognize that they have to build rapport. There's a competitive marketplace now, and therefore go and educate yourself is what I would say. And hopefully today's been part of educating people. Certainly I've learned a thing or two. Very interesting to see where you think the multiples are going, what's driving that. That's very, very interesting, sort of trying to look around the corner there. So it just remains for me to say, Hugh Owen from Accel Club, or Accel Pro, I should say. Thank you so much for coming on the show and enlightening us about all this good stuff.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Okay, and that's our recording done. So folks listening live, thanks, a bit of a marathon. If you've made it to this point of the video, you've got a lot of stamina, but hopefully this is important stuff. I mean, it's important because not only if you're considering selling a business, but I would say this: if you're going to even consider selling a business in future, or if you never want to sell, but you want to understand whether what you're doing has any commercial value, i.e. is it a good use of your time and effort and money, then I think you should educate yourself about this. There you go, my two penneth or 4 cents. Hugh, thanks so much for coming on. I must let you get back to the business of actually closing some deals, but it's been really educational stuff. And thank you again for sharing so much great